Okay, thanks everybody for coming out. Welcome to our Friday Live, which is our FM BetterForms Dulce Engineering sponsored peer meetup group. We try not to make the meetings about BetterForms and things like that, but they tend to kind of veer that way a little bit. We're always looking for new guests and new topics and things like that. So if you have something you'd like to share or contribute with, by all means, please just let us know, and we'll try to schedule in an upcoming show. Today, we are going to be featuring OAuth and OAuth authentication, and a little bit of an excerpt of a presentation I'm going to be doing at dotfmp, which is a conference in Berlin coming up. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going right away here. So we'll be typically we've been including a segment called UX Corner. Pearson's going to be covering that again. And if you have any other things that you'd like to for him to cover in the future, please do let us know, or you can message him directly. We'll be running through last week, or last month, I should say, we started a feature sort of like a back to basics on HTML. And the team is going to be doing some presentations. I'm kind of looking forward to that. I have no idea what they're going to be presenting on, but I know it's going to be good, and we'll get cracking right away. So we don't have a lot of announcements because we covered most of them in last month. So we don't have a lot of new features or things like that we're releasing, other than the fact that OAuth is generally available. So I'm going to jump right in. Actually, before we even jump into that, maybe what we'll do is we'll kick off in a proper workflow with our UX corner, and we'll start off with that. So that being said, I'm going to flip it over to you, Pearson. Actually, yeah, there you are, and you'll be muted there. So
sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Charles. Yeah, so today for my monthly UX corner, I was thinking of, or I'd like to talk about the use of multi-step forms. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we can get started. And there we go. Oh, that's not the that's not the right one. Sorry about this. My Figma's just been a little buggy right now. And here, yeah, the presentation is being a little buggy, but I'll just start off here. What I want to talk about is designing multi-step forms. Now, we've noticed that this is a pretty common workflow that we've seen in a lot of our clients' projects, where you might be asking for some information from your users, or they might be signing up for something. It might be either ordering an item from your app, and they have to go through this process of entering their information, their personal information, maybe shipping information, billing information. And sometimes these forms can get pretty long and extensive. And what we want to do is, or what I want to do is explain the benefits of using a multi-step form, and how those, and when to use them, how to optimize them, and why they're effective. So I think this presentation is going to work now. So essentially, there are two basic types of forms. The first one, before the multi-step form, is just a single page application. And so this is just a simple form where you have just a simple proposition, whether it's a contract, maybe you're subscribing to something. They don't have many fields, typically 2 to 5 fields, very short. You only need one type of information from the user, so you're not asking them to purchase anything or select items from a catalog. And this is when you want the user to have complete transparency from the start of what you'll be asking them. Now, the second type of form is what I'll be talking about, is the multi-step form. And so these are reasonably long forms, typically over 6 fields. This is when the user expects to part with a reasonable amount of information, is motivated enough to complete multiple stages. And this is a type of form that you can easily, or where you want to easily group your questions to similar topic clusters. Now, what's the point of using these multi-step forms? This is when, or you want to use this type of form for sufficiently complex or long questions or yeah, forms. And this is when you want to break it into multiple steps, and this is used to deliver a higher conversion rate. So there have been some studies that that compare single-use forms or single application pages versus multi-step forms. So if you have a simple contact form spreading it across multiple pages may be irritating or confusing to the user, forcing them or causing them to want to either save it for later, do it later, maybe never even do it at all. One study actually compares this strategy of breaking it into steps, compares it to how Disney forms lines for their rides. Now, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but the whole system is based on making it seem like a faster process than it really is. So at Disney, you know, you have your rides and you're waiting in a line. If it's just a single line that goes for miles, no chance anybody's going to stand in there. But what Disney does is they loop it around, they add some distractions, they tell you how far you are into the line, like maybe giving you an estimate of when you'll be able to actually get on the ride. And this is all to make it seem faster. And so in the same way that Disney forms their lines, you're essentially doing the same tactic with these multi-step forms, making the user more likely to finish this process because it seems faster, splitting it up into different steps, showing them the progress of where they are in the form, telling them if they're close to being done or anything like that. That improves the conversion rate. So, for example, there was a study from HubSpot which reported an 86% higher conversion rate using multi-step forms compared to single page applications. So here's an example of just a random form. This isn't from any of you guys, don't worry. But this is just a form that I found online, just showing some really basic information that I'm sure a lot of applications that we're building can benefit, or that a lot of applications that we're building probably use the same information. So this is just split up into billing information and shipping information. It is splitting these into two different categories, which is something that I touched on earlier, but these are still pretty massive forms. There's a lot of what we call cognitive overload, which is when a user's looking at something and all they see is just tons of fields, tons of words, even this calling them optional or required. They're so jumbled together you can't even tell which ones are required and which ones are optional. You can't say like, oh well, at least 50% of them are optional, so it's actually kind of short. It's all just a mess, and it's hard to read and take in at once. So as an example of a quick improvement that can be made is using these same fields, just splitting it up into something simple. So starting off with an about you section. What's your name? What's your last name? Email, phone, and the company you work for. And these are just pulling the same fields from the previous page. So this is a pretty basic starting point. It's inviting. You're simplifying everything. You're contextualizing what they're filling out. So all you see as the user is, oh, this is just information about myself. I know myself. I know what my name is. That's really easy to fill out. So let me just start this form, and I'm sure it'll be done in a jiffy. And you go to the next step, and it's payment information, and all you see is your credit card stuff. So that's easy to fill out. You have your credit card with you. A lot of browsers, I mean, at least I know Google Chrome, you can save your credit card information. So that's an easy fill out as well. You click next step. Now you have the billing information. You know, filling out this address, you can have methods of using, maybe it's the Google API, but filling out an address might be able to autofill a lot of this other information as well. So that makes it even faster. And on this next step is the shipping information. And you can even use a checkbox like this to say, use the same shipping, use my billing address as my shipping address. And that autofills this, this section as well. So splitting it up into these four different steps makes it way easier and way more inviting than seeing this massive list of tasks to fill out. So that's just a quick way of improving a basic form like that into multiple steps. Now, there are some best practices to make sure that these forms are useful and can be and can benefit the user. For example, clustering similar questions, like I mentioned before. Multi-step forms work best when similar question types are clustered together. This keeps the user's mind focused on one area of data and reduces the cognitive overload. It is a balance, so don't oversplit these sections, as it may annoy users to make them think that they're done with the section, but then you keep asking for more. So typically, a reasonable amount of steps would be 4 to 5, maybe 6 steps, keeping it simple, making it easy to consume for the user and not overwhelming them, even if even though we're reducing that cognitive overload by splitting it up into these steps. You don't want to create a new cognitive overload by overwhelming them with a million steps with a million questions in each of them. So that's just something to be mindful of. The next best practice is just to keep things simple. You want to start it off easy. That's why I mentioned in the example that I was showing, just starting off with your name, your information, email, all that kind of stuff. You're keeping it simple for the user, so you're not jumping straight into the nitty gritty. You might even say that you can split these steps into different different breakdowns, where you start off with the basic personal details, which is, like you said, the name, the email, and then the next stage can be kind of the meat of the whole process, and that might be selecting products, entering or requesting specific information. Maybe you're setting up an appointment. That's kind of the meat of the whole process. Like, what are they actually filling out for? The next step could just be the delivery details, and then the final step might be payment, and then you're done. So just starting it off easy before you get into the hard stuff. You just don't want to overwhelm them with 1,000 hard questions right off the bat. You want to kind of lead them in smoothly, so that all you're really trying to do is get them to start this form, because if they're not starting it, they're definitely not finishing it. So you just want to have that inviting initial step. Next would be the use of progress bars. Now, this is to show where they are in this multi-step form process. You want to let the users know how much time they have to invest, or how much time they might need to invest in this process, how long it might take. And so those can just be as simple as a simple bar going across the top. You can be splitting it up into steps and telling them what step they're on, and showing them the future steps that will come afterwards. There's many ways to do this, and I'll get into how BetterForms is going to be handling that and helping you guys out after these best practices. The next one would be to not have too many steps. Like I said, if your progress bar can't fit nicely on a standard mobile screen, you've probably got too many steps. That's why you want to keep it limited to maybe 4 to 6, because someone wants to see that they have another 20 stages before they get to the end of it. So just be mindful of how many steps you're going to include. And the last one is allowing the user to move back and forth between steps. Now, this is an important one. Just in case people need to go back and change information, or if sometimes forms can be like I've filled out forms that are somewhat misleading, making me think that I'm filling out one type of information, but then I realize that the next step is the information that I thought I was filling out, and I have to go back and change my previous answers. You just want to give them that option to navigate through the form, double checking things, making edits, just managing the user's expectations around the information that they've entered. And here's what I want to show as kind of an example of a full multi-step form. This would be to create an appointment for something. So in this example, our favorite fictional brand, Digital Matter, step 1, you're choosing between these 3 options, and you see it's step 1, and you can see that there's going to be 3 steps in total. Step 1 is instructing you, please make a selection from the list below. You click whatever option, you click next. Now you have your step 2, please select a date from the calendar below. You see that you've already completed the first step. It's got a check mark on it, but you can go back if you need. You're on step 2, you fill out your date, click next. This is incorrect, but ideally this would say that this second step was complete and you're on step 3. At least we have this navigation here to indicate, or at least this header here to indicate that we're on step 3. Here's where you might select a time, and at the very end, these would all be checked off. I think that's just an issue with the prototype that I made. But in this final step, all of these previous 3 steps are complete. It says thank you. And you have the option to go back and change any of this information. You're kind of seeing this summary of the appointment that you set. You made an appointment for option 1 on the February 3rd at 4 p.m. and you can finish. And so that's kind of bringing it all together into how a multi-step form could look, making it really easy to fill out, making it look inviting, and that's what we want to try to do with BetterForms. So what I've been developing is creating components for each of these, creating different components for each of these different sections on a form. So creating components for the different steps, different headers, the different types of inputs here. You have a multiple selection here. You have a date picker here. Another type of multiple selection here. So I've been creating these different components so that when you guys are creating your multi-step forms, you won't have to be trying to think of how do I make a time selector from scratch? How should that look? We want to provide you with those pre-built components right out of the box, especially with our drag and drop editor coming out at some point. You'll be able to just drag and drop these components onto your form and just making it really easy to create these custom forms that are really modular, really customizable, and providing you with different styles so that they don't all look the same. Yeah, so at some point I would like to show these different components, different styles. Today might not be that day, but maybe next Friday Live, we can show off how to use this in action. So yeah, thanks for listening to my presentation about multi-step forms. If you have any questions, then I'd love to hear them.
Pearson, that was great. Thank you. Does all of the steps need to be represented by the progress bar? And what I mean by that is, like, for example, let's say I have 3 steps where I'm doing something, and then I have another step, which is a summary page or a next actions, like after I'm done it, congratulations, you've signed up, you've done this, and then I go off to somewhere else in the workflow. Do you show those in the progress bar, or just kind of like what goes in there? Which items warrant a progress step? Because it seems like you could have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 even steps in there.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've read and what I know, I don't think there's a definitive rule for that. But in my experience, what I like to do, and as we can see here, if these steps were represented properly, on your step 3, this would be the last step, and this next page is telling you thank you. I didn't include that in this navigation up here, only because the work is done at this point. There are no more steps to be worked on. You've finished, or at least you have the option to finish, and this is kind of just a review page. So for me personally, I like this method of not showing these last kind of stages in the steps navigation, only because it may look, you're just adding more potential work to the user's mind. So you see that you have 3 steps here, but if you saw 4 or 5, you're now thinking, whoa, I've just, this form is now 30% larger in my mind.
So it's like the work that has to be done.
Yeah, you want to, because like with that Disney lineup example, you want to make it seem fast, even if it's going to be a little tedious. Breaking it up into this way, showing the just only a few steps makes the user think, well, this is going to be pretty easy. I'm going to start and I'm going to get through this and it'll be a piece of cake.
Dean had a question, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would echo kind of your question, Charles. Personally, I prefer a progress bar or a percentage or something. I don't put steps on the first page because I think that's just an immediate turnoff. But if you're 0%, of course you know you're 0%. So maybe a little bit of flexibility in that. But the comment I wanted to make, or just the observation, and again, you know, you're looking at this from the user perspective, but I personally don't do sales on the internet, but I'm doing data collection, rare disease space, and so on. I think it's really important, and I think hopefully it's obvious to everybody, but name and email on the first screen capture that, because if they bail, you want to have a way to get back to them. So if it's a cart, then you want to be able to, you know, go back and, hey, something's in your cart or whatever that is. So just, I love the idea of grouping styles together, and certainly content in a reasonable flow. But those three fields, I think, are the most critical right on screen one. If, you know, if they're not if not logged in or whatever previously.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think the name and the email for that reason that you mentioned is super important, as well as just being kind of that initial rabbit hole step to get them engaged with the form in the first place. Like I said, the name and the email is just, you know, that off the top of your head. That's easy to fill out. You've entered it a million times on a million forms, so that's a really easy starting point to get someone to begin the form process.
I think you could also, it's easy enough to do A/B type testing, you know, build two variations and either funnel them differently or two separate apps, however you do that. And you can optimize that, as Dean said. You know, the abandoned cart is, I think probably Shopify and companies like that have probably done a ton of research on that kind of stuff, as to, do you let the user pick a product first and sort of get a little bit more invested into the product before you ask or weight them down with prompting them for that additional information or not?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, when I was doing my research for this segment, that's where I pulled the HubSpot report of, I think they did some A/B testing between a multi-step form and a single page form, and they had an 86% higher conversion rate with the multi-step form. There was another study that showed a 14% improvement on conversion rates from a two-step form, or between a two-step form and a one-step form. So that's just adding one more step, or splitting your information, or splitting those fields into two steps instead of one, and that created a 14% improvement. Just a lot of companies have gone through that research process to confirm the benefits of using a multi-step form. In certain cases, obviously, if it's something really short, like I said, you know, 5 fields doesn't need to be split up into 5 steps necessarily. It all depends on the information that you're looking to acquire from the user. But yeah, definitely, from what I've noticed in a lot of the client projects that we work on here, multi-step forms are pretty beneficial.
I want to make a counterpoint on that. Sometimes I want to know what I'm getting into before I provide any personal information. And I can guarantee you, I mean, I can tell you that many times I have not started a form because they asked for my email address before I could see what was on step 2 and 3. So one practical example would be my biggest pet peeve, when I have to provide personal information before I can find out what shipping is going to cost.
Right.
I'm going to run. I absolutely hate that. But there's other things too, like types of application forms where they might be asking a question that I need to prepare, and I just want to see what I'm getting into to decide if I want to apply for whatever this is. And I just don't want to provide my email address until I know what I'm getting into.
Yeah, and that's a completely valid response to seeing multiple steps and not knowing exactly what they are. So, like I said, you know, what we want to do with BetterForms is provide you with different styles of components to present the same spaces in this form. So, while this example shows the 1, 2, 3 step with some headers, there are other methods of presenting a multi-step form where you might have all the form headings presented on the left side in a sidebar. So you'll see what step 1 is, you'll see what step 2 is, you'll see what step 3 is. At least you'll showing the context of what those are. So you might say, or you might see in the sidebar, step 1 is select an appointment type. Step 2 is select an appointment date and all that kind of stuff. So we want to provide you guys with the flexibility of showing and not showing whatever information you think would be most logical or for the context of what you're asking for. So
Jeroen, you had a question? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, Person. What would you suggest? Because I agree a bit with Dean, where if you most of the time with conditional questions, right, we might skip a set of questions or a whole chapter because you answered one question in a way that the other questions are not important anymore, right? Numbering would then be, what do you suggest? Jumping the number, or would you, how would you do that?
Yeah, so jumping in the number probably wouldn't be the right solution to that problem,
Right.
only because it might cause confusion in the user. They might think, oh, is there a bug that I missed a step, or this doesn't look right? But I do agree that I think conditional logic plays a really big part in these forms. And I'm trying to pull up this article that I was reading that mentioned the use of conditional logic and what to do when it does create a way to surpass another step. But at least I can show you in this example that I was showing. If I can get back there. The quick improvement that I made on this one. For example, this isn't a perfect example, but on one step you're filling out your address information, and on the next step, you're able to conditionally show or conditionally say, just use the same information as what I used previously. So at least providing context as to what might be getting skipped or what might not be necessary is really important. Sorry, I'm still finding this this part of the article. I think this is it. Be careful with your progress bar if you have conditional path. However, if you have the user skip through a stage that they can see on the progress bar, make sure you tell them why they have done this. Otherwise, their session might become confusing. You might create this sense of them, forgetting or missing a step. I think what this is saying is just, if you are going to skip a step, let them know what step has been skipped and why it's been skipped. So if it's, we noticed you don't have to fill out this step because your previous answer indicated that this isn't necessary. Just letting them know, I think, is really important if you are going to skip any steps.
Agree. Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any in the chat at all?
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Hi, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Charles start to smile. Anyway, I have my scenario is a little bit different, and I would like to have a suggestion. Okay, so about what I need, that is a waiver, is easy. Okay, so is the short, the first method that you show is the short one. But the second one, unfortunately, I need to charge on internet service. And I have discovered that if I integrate with Stripe, and every time that you make a charge in Stripe, Stripe first need to create an account. Okay, so technically Stripe need name and an email. Okay, we make shortly. What I don't like, because I'm only an account and I like to have a clean path, I don't like if Charles buy in 1 month 3 times free product in Stripe appear 3 times. I would like that the system check if char exists or not, And if it don't exist, create the first account in Stripe. And if it already exists, say, I don't create a new account with the same information of Charles. I connect the new sales on Charles' account. So everything is more consolidated. Considering that we have first in FileMaker the Charles account, because when you collect the information here, we already have in FileMaker, and the Stripe is only a consequence that is mandatory to make the charge. You suggest to make the control of the account in FileMaker, or how to move the control that is mandatory for Stripe to make the charge. So I need to have an interaction with Stripe, and Stripe have an API that first make a query if this email exists. If this email exists, give you back a result that the account already exists, and load your information to make the chart, not simply populate 3 times 3 account with the same information. I don't know if everybody understand my question. If we
understand.
solve this, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I totally understand. So just to reiterate, just to make sure we understand it correct though, you basically don't want to create multiple accounts in Stripe or have multiple accounts in FileMaker when the user has already previously purchased.
Yes, because
Okay.
if a people call you, say, I'm Charles.
Yeah, so there's a
remember
couple strategies, Alessandro, you can do there. The first one is you need some identifier for the person, right? So that's typically an email. So at the point that you either capture the email or the person logs in, you know who they are. So you've identified the user. That stops your redundancy on the front end side or the FileMaker side, the database side. If they've already logged in, then they have some type of a profile. If you have an email, you have some type of a profile as well, even if they don't physically log in, but you know that email is unique to that person. You can reasonably assume that it'll always be. And then in your database, you associate the ID of the Stripe customer. So it's, you have a field called ID Stripe customer. So as soon as you purchase the first time, you pre-populate that ID. So now in the future, when they go on to that next step of payment, you already see that you've created, because of the presence of the ID, you've already created an account in Stripe, and you use that ID populating going forward. If not, then you're going to have to do a 2-step process where you create the account in Stripe, return the ID, and then generate the final checkout so that they're all associated.
Yeah. So you prefer that we control everything in FileMaker and Stripe is only the result?
This is a really interesting question. We used to do it like that. We've actually changed the way we do it because it's tricky, especially when you handle things like upgrades and downgrades in our case, for subscription management. So what we do now is we do check to see if you have an account, but assuming that you've never had an account before, we create that account in Stripe, pre-populate somewhat optimistically that you're going to complete the sign-up process. And then we generate the Stripe token that gives you the cart. So that jumps into the cart now. The problem happens when you start to do things like upgrades and downgrades and those things, like who is the source of truth? So we actually use Stripe as the source of truth, not FileMaker for that. So what happens is Stripe does a callback or webhook when you purchase an item. That webhook has a few pieces of information, who the customer is and what the product is. So what we do is our webhook software, or the webhook side, the interface, the connector, receives that data and it automatically just adjusts that particular client for whatever Stripe said. So now Stripe becomes the source of truth. This allows our administration people to go and make a change to something in Stripe, and it automatically reflects in FileMaker, which is a real problem when those get out of sync.
I think it's the right path. So you move the problem to Stripe.
Sort of. We kind of split the problem. If it's not there in the first place, we create it. We have to create the customer. But once that's created, once you have an ID of the Stripe, whenever Stripe's callbacks, their webhooks come in, and we use a BetterForms API for that. As soon as they come in, that automatically writes the other side.
But what's happening in the form that we have in BetterForm in the moment that people, because now this client have a system that is not very secure. And when you type an email, if I put your email, load your information. So he don't make any check if in the real person or not. I don't like that. So theoretically, if we move the problem to Stripe, is Stripe that make the authentication and send to you a
No,
code?
Stripe, you don't actually make authentication in Stripe. You have to generate, if you're using Stripe, Stripe's got a, maybe this actually warrants probably a whole Friday Live thing on using Stripe in different modes. I think that would actually be a really good topic, because it is a real pain in the butt. Stripe is great for certain types of management, but the process can be a little bit tricky. You have to know who that person is, and then you generate effectively a secure link to a Stripe cart or a Stripe checkout, depending on what you're using. And that link is associated with that account underneath the hood. So you do need to know who that person is in the first place. You're going to still have to authenticate them in some fashion.
Because also I would like to not have the sensible information about the full code, the full number of the credit card in FileMaker. I prefer that the problem is on the Stripe side.
We highly don't recommend that, but
exactly.
People do what they want to do, right? You shouldn't.
No, because
really
with the API of Stripe, you only have the last 4 digits. That is correct only when you are on the phone to understand if they're correct. But the information on the card is totally in Stripe. But anyway.
And that's why you use the token coming back from Stripe, because that identifies not only what they bought. And so, Charles, just to further elaborate, subscriptions are a little bit different than one-off purchases, right? Or another purchase that occurs at a different time, but do capture the last 4 digits of the credit card, because that's how you kind of verify things with the customer. And you need to give them that choice when they purchase again to say, oh, I don't want to use that credit card. I want to use something else, or that one expired or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Stripe has a Stripe checkout, and there's Stripe customer portal and Stripe checkout. There's 2 sort of services that are relatively new, meaning the past 5 years. And that experience is you basically create a authenticated token which registers you with their port-out or the checkout, and from there you can do things like add cards, create cards, change what the default card is going to be, and then if you want to make any purchases, you can optionally do that as well, or changes actually to things. So yeah, maybe what we should do is we should have that as a segment in the future. We'll do that, talk about all Stripe, all things Stripe, at least the things that we know anyway. Does anybody have any other questions for Pearson? Pearson, I found a multi-step form that somebody had built. Actually, I've demoed it before, and maybe I can show you that one, because that one addresses Jason's concern about involvement and not sort of diving in too deep or getting into something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's see it.
All right. Can you see that okay? This is a building application, which is a super common type of thing that people fill out. And this is a form that's in progress, or an application, I should say, in progress. And what they did here, I think is kind of neat, is there's a navigation on the side, and you can jump to different segments of the form here automatically and go back. I don't believe there's a progress indicator if this section is filled out, but I think there could be easily right in here, like a little checkbox or something like that. But basically you go down, and what I really like about this application is it doesn't feel too heavy. All of this data is all dynamic, so it's all coming from FileMaker, all of this stuff in here, and there's all kinds of street addresses and all of these things. They're all coming from a single tenant FileMaker database. And it's a single front end for BetterForms, but then multiple databases in the back. And you can sort of jump through all of these things. And then there is conditional logic. So if I turn that on, there's some more stuff that shows up here. And I guess that makes stuff disappear. It makes it feel quite a bit lighter, so you don't get too freaked out about filling these things out. There's a bunch of dynamic sections. I can't tell which ones there are, but I know if you pick certain things, stuff in here changes, I think. As well, there's ability to upload files, project documents, and then they have a summary at the bottom. It's not every field, but it's some of the fields.
Yeah, I would say this is a great example of where sometimes, depending on the form, depending on the information that you're looking for, maybe there isn't a way to neatly reduce it to just 5 steps. And in this form, there's no way around it. You got to ask all these questions. But at least with this conditional logic, and I'm sure when you start a new form, all of those sections that expand when you click click one of those options. At least right now, when the form starts, they're all collapsed. You don't see all this other information that you may or may not have to fill out. So in that sense, I think this is a great way to, while it's not like a multi-page step form, it's still one page technically that you're scrolling down, but you've split it up into all of these different sections, and you can go through them. You see how many steps there are on the side. So that is kind of your the same way of showing, you know, there's going to be 5 steps in this form. In this case, you know, you see that there's 7 sections in this form. So all it is just trying to make the make this form as easy to consume, easy to look at as possible.
Cool.
The thing that immediately jumps to mind when I see, and I like this form and I like the way it flows, but is how you do the validation. So Pearson, as you roll out your modules, maybe not 1.0, but 1.1, right after that, we need to be thinking about validation and how to guide the user back to where they popped up a section and didn't fill it in or had invalidator. Invalidator, you can usually capture right in real time, but if they missed a section, that's
last month we released another template, and let's see if I can find it here. And it is this one here, multi-step application, and it has kind of a neat thing in here. So here's that first page, and I jump to the second page here. And if I try to advance, it automatically takes me back up and highlights those things that are missing. And that's kind of a sort of a nice experience as well. Could do that all day. All right. Okay, super. We're going to jump over to our continuing segment, which is back to basics with HTML and CSS. So I'm not sure who's leading that off, but take it away.
So we will be talking about Flex, and I'll start off by just explaining what Flex is and comparing it to the other layout systems that we have in CSS. That's grid, inline, and block. There's also inline block. So I'll screen share just an image. And so Flex, also known as Flexbox, is a CSS layout module that allows flexible positioning and sizing of elements within a container. So Flexbox expands the capabilities of the CSS box model, and it simplifies the creation of flexible and responsive layouts. With Flexbox, you define a flex container, and inside of the container, you place the child elements that you want to flex. So this provides properties to control the positioning, alignment, and spacing of flex items within the container. Flex is ideal for one-dimensional layouts. It could be horizontal or vertical, making it suitable for navigation menus and card layouts. Comparing the Flex to other layout systems, Grid is designed for two-dimensional layouts. We have rows and columns. It allows precise control over the element placing, sizing, and it makes it most suitable for complex grid structures such as magazine layouts, dashboard interfaces. And we also have inline block and inline block. So an example of an inline element would be your hyperlink tag or your span tag. So inline elements flow within the text content to only take up as much width as necessary. The inline layout is useful for incorporating elements within text flow, such as links, emphasized text, or icons. So with the inline, there's like one drawback where you're not allowed to specify the height. And that's where inline block comes in. If you switch the display type to an inline block element, you'll be able to make this inline and both specify the height and width. While the block would be a paragraph tag, and block elements stack vertically and occupies the full width that's available to it. And the block layout is commonly used for headings, sections, or content that you specifically want to be in blocks. And I'll pass this off to San to display Flexbox.
Yeah, so I'll start by sharing my screen over here, and Andrew will explain to you guys what I'm kind of doing and some examples. All right, here we go. Andrew, do you want to take it away from here?
Yeah, sure. So in our last Friday Live presentation, we introduced Tailwind and how you can use it to quickly add styling to your elements. Positioning elements using Tailwind's flex classes is one of the areas where it really shines. So you can find a list of Tailwind's flex classes in their documentation page. And while all of them are pretty handy and are worth taking a look at, the ones I find the most useful are the flex direction and the justify content classes. So you can see there, Hassan has them pulled up. A lot of them are a bit confusing, but we'll do our best to explain what each of them are doing. So Hassan, over there, if you pull up the example. So to apply flex to a element, all it takes is to, if you go to the editor, give your parent class a basically a class called flex. And what that'll do is every element inside of that flex parent will be placed essentially beside each other.
So what I'll add on here is, so how Christina was talking about putting things in a container. So first I put both these input classes in their own containers, so they're in their own divs. So let me give this separate name, let's say state. This kind of building off of like an example here where like if you have like organization info or something. So now you give them a parent container, and let's put flex over here. And now we have them side by side. And then now also you can use additional Tailwind classes like space x2, and now there's room between them.
Right. Yeah. So that's a really easy way to apply or to make elements kind of appear side by side from each other. There's other ways to do it. For example, Christina showed like inline and inline blocks, but we believe flex is one of the simplest ways to position elements beside each other and give them kind of spacing. So I've built we've built a flex example in the past that I've kind of refactored a bit to better showcase the better use cases. So you can see in this example, there are a couple of implementations of flex boxes in HTML. I won't go into detail on each of them today, but this example is public for everyone to refer to when building your apps. Some highlights I want to point out are the flex1 class, which is a class that you give to a children element of your flex box. And I would say a good way to think about flex1 is that it makes the element greedy, which means it takes up as much space, available space as possible. So you can see there, Hassan gave his child element flex1, which made the org name take up as much space as possible, and then the other ones kind of take up only as much space as they need. The other class I want to highlight is justify. For example, the justify center class. You know, the question how to center a div is a bit of a running joke, but I think using flex and justify center is one of the simplest and definitely the one I use the most often. Another benefit of using flex boxes is responsiveness, and that is the elements adjust depending on the user screen size. So you can see there how Hassan is giving each of them kind of media breakpoints. And then you can see, depending on what the screen size is, it will do different things. For example, on a smaller screen size, it will flex in the column, and then on a larger screen size, it will flex horizontally, so in the row. And this is extremely useful if you need to accommodate both desktop and mobile devices. And we'll likely go into more detail on media breakpoints in a future segment. But yeah, to summarize, using Flex is a great way to lay out and position elements on your page, and to keep it, as the name suggests, as flexible as possible.
Yeah, and this is all using Tailwind stuff. So even here we have the LG. This is breakpoints from Tailwind. Every single class here is being used from Tailwind, and they help us style our things a lot better.
And you can even use this on BetterForms elements. So this is not something we plan to show, but if you see there for the style classes of the fields, or even style classes of the groups, you can also give that flex, which will essentially flex every BetterForms element inside that group of fields. Oh, sorry, you did it on the field there. Yeah, so everything in that field would get flexed. But if you put it on the group, all of your field elements would also get flexed as well. And this comes in handy if you wanted to show two BetterForms elements side by side versus the traditional way of showing them in a column. But yeah, I think that wraps that up mostly. Does anybody have any questions on Flex and maybe some ways to use it in your own apps?
I think one of the ways you could start to really take advantage of is literally just go to the example page that that Android created or whomever, and have a look at how those elements are all positioned, because you're not limited by anything. So you're not stuck with having some item that's sitting in a random spot on your page. But once you have these sort of very basic tools and understanding of them, you can really dial things in exactly as you want it to be. What happens if you said the flex one is greedy. What happens if I have two flex ones and they're equally as greedy?
So flex one really just determines the growing and the shrinking of the class. For example, if you have it, I don't know if Hassan can pull up the documentation on the flex. Yeah, if you scroll up there, it's just called flex on the top. So flex one just kind of sets the properties of the flex. For example, a flex one gives it the properties of 1, 1, and 0%. The ones and the ones just means the grow and the shrink, which means whether it allows it to grow within the flex box or allows it to shrink within the flex box. So if you have two kind of elements with that in there, they're both they'll both be able to grow and shrink depending on how much space they need in accordance to the other one. And you can try that, Hassan, if you go into your app and kind of give to children element the flex one. And you can get rid of the media breakpoints. And you'll see they're both taking as much space as they need.
Yeah, so this is the difference with one having flex one only and the other one not having it versus both of them having it. So they're basically just even. I think that's all for our HTML segment today.
Does anybody have any questions on anything that they've covered? Okay, thanks, guys. That was great. Thank you. I'm not going to lie. I learned something from Christina's presentation. So that was really good.
Inline block, right?
Inline block. Yeah, I never really thought of it like that. Like I understood what it was, but I virtually never use it. And I never think of it like that as like, it's just a block that it's an inline block. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of funny. All right. We're going to jump to Eduardo and I are going to do a next segment here, and we're going to talk about OAuth. And OAuth is a new feature in BetterForms that you can start to use right away. So I'm going to jump to my screen here, and we'll just talk a little bit about what it is, and then we'll show you how you implement it into an application. I have just a very simple app here. Has a landing page, but it actually has a sign up and sign into your account button. And in this particular use case, as long as the person has some kind of, we're using GitHub here, as long as they have a GitHub account, they can actually log into this particular editor, this app. This is just an experimental JavaScript application. So what OAuth is it basically allows us to use third-party sources or federated sources for authentication within BetterForms. Normally, we're using basic authentication, which is usually some type of two parts, an email or a username. BetterForms uses email and a password. And that email and password is normally stored in your helper file. The password is hashed, but it's stored there. And with when you're using OAuth, you don't need to now manage things like password resets, right? And we've all used OAuth in virtually every application. I use Notion a lot, for example, or Zoom. Even when you use Zoom, you might be logging in with your Google or your LinkedIn or whatever. So this is kind of what the experience is like here. Let me just make sure. I just want to see GitHub. I just want to make sure I'm actually logged out of GitHub for this particular application, which I'm not. So, and there we go. Okay. So I'm actually logged out of GitHub here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this button here. And what that will do is that will take me to a page where it says log into log into BetterForms to continue to do FM Better Edit. And it says continue with GitHub. So when I click on that, and this is using Auth0, which is an identity provider, we'll talk about them in a second. It's saying sign into GitHub to continue to use Better Edit. So I'm going to sign in. So now I've actually authenticated with GitHub. And this could be Facebook, it could be Google, or one of maybe about 50 or 60 other providers. And then now I'm actually authenticated in the app. We'll talk about how this whole workflow works in a second. But one of the main differences, one of the main things is if I ever want to add another provider, it's super, super easy. So let me actually, oops, I'm going to hit back on my app here. Let me go back and log out for a quick second. I want to show you just how easy that would be to add one extra provider in here. And Eduardo, I'm assuming Auth0 is working again. Yes, looks like. Yeah. Their site was down earlier on. And Eduardo's going to take us through all of this, but I want to show you some of the benefits just really, really quick here. So, and we'll talk about this in detail, but I just want to show you this here really fast. Remember, I could only log in with Gitbook. Suddenly I decide, well, you know what? My customers, GitHub. Nobody uses GitHub in our community, but they all have Google accounts. So I can literally, at this flick of a switch here, I have Google OAuth, and this is using through Auth0. I can enable that provider in GitHub, or sorry, Google, my mistake. And now when I jump over to my application and I want to log in again, I would probably change the wording of the button, but you see right away, I can now log in with Google if I wanted to. For our particular use case for this app, we only want to use one type of thing because we want to have an integration with GitHub. But most apps, you probably wouldn't be doing that. So you'd probably be doing something like this, where I just turn that on. Right? BetterForms, our new feature, OAuth, supports a number of different things, and we'll talk about the integration in just a second. But basically, we support Google as a direct source, so you can use Google Gmail account. Okta, which is an identity service provider, and Auth0, which actually was acquired by Okta or vice versa, I'm not sure. And you can use either of those companies for OAuth. Through the reason we picked Okta and Auth0 is those are the two biggest identity providers, and through them you can use virtually any other system. So that means if you want to use your on-prem authentication, or you want to use LinkedIn or GitHub or your Steam account if you're a gamer or whatever it may be, you can use all of these sources. So if you have any questions, by all means, please just put them in the chat or feel free to jump in. We'll try to monitor that as we go. Somebody asked about Apple ID. I believe Apple ID is supported now by Auth0. Right, we don't support Apple ID directly though, but as long as one of those big identity providers supports it, then you can go through. So they act as a connector. I'm just going to turn this off. And let's go back and have a look at how we actually integrate this in. And what I'll do is I've built up an application here called Friday Live OAuth, and it's just using a new template at OAuth demo. And what I'm going to do here is I've added a button already. So let me actually jump to the login page and have a look at that. Oops. Okay, so what I've done is I've added a button on here, and I'll show you how we do that. We'll do it again. And normally this is out of the box, out of this particular template. It has a regular BetterForms login. You can use BetterForms in conjunction with OAuth as well, so they work simultaneously. When you register, the register workflow and the login workflow are identical to BetterForms basic authentication with a very small caveat. And that is an additional script hook that we've added in now. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So here's what we've done. We've taken any of your applications, and we'll assume that you already have some type of a login. You know, you could hide these fields if you want to only use Auth0 as a login mechanism. But what I've done is I've added an extra one in here. So we've added a button on here. Here's my button here. And it's very, very simple. It's just a basic button. You can style it up any way you want. In this case, it has actually some opinionated theme based on the theme of the application that we're in, the template. And it has a very simple action here. And this is a new action that you can find in the snippets. And it's called login auth0. All right, so that's a new, oh, sorry, my bad. This is a named action that this one's called login auth0. You can put the direct action in here, and let's have a look at what login auth0 is actually doing. It's pretty simple. There's a new name, our new actions. Yeah, there it is. That's the right one. Okay, this is the one deleted. Okay. All right, so yeah, there. It's going to take us through this into this special path in BetterForms. This is the new part of the new feature. That's going to make a call to whatever provider that we've configured, and we'll show you how to do that in a sec. And then that comes back, and it's going to prompt us for the login screen. This is the first part. The very first part of the integration is to add the button. That's pretty much the only thing that I have to do on my side, I believe. I don't think I've missed anything. And we have to do one more thing here as well, is we're going to jump over to the app settings. And you're probably not in this area too often, but under application settings, we have a feature or an area in here called authentication, and it says enable third-party authentication. And we're going to turn that on. And how are we going to connect this app, Eduardo? We're going to use Auth0.
Auth0, yeah.
Okay. All right. And what else do I have to configure in here?
You would need the subdomain and the credentials.
Okay, so I'll have to get that from you. So we can't do that
Yeah.
just yet. We'll switch to your screen in a second, and then
Mhm.
we'll enter some of this other information.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump to that then.
You can create a new application and set up your credentials or get your credentials from Auth0 and add them to BetterForms. So here it's what they call tenants. It's pretty much the same idea, I think, of how we call organizations in BetterForms. So then here you could come and create a new application that I'm gonna call Friday Live Demo, and we select as a single page web applications. To be honest, like I didn't see a difference in our use case if you select single page or regular application, because this would be more if you're using like to build an app from scratch. But in our case, all we need would be, so your application set up. So as long as you have this subdomain, we don't need the whole domain. For BetterForms, you just need a subdomain. I'm going to send this to Charles so he knows. And the client ID.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sending to you on.
Oh,
Slack.
okay. I was
And
just thinking,
then
actually,
client
Eduardo, our
secret.
example file may not work because we don't actually have a helper file connected to it. So I'm going to see if I can just connect one up really quick of one of our existing ones. Because we don't have, it's gonna the BetterForms, the OAuth process will run a script or a hook, but we'll walk you through the whole thing. But unfortunately, I don't have I'd have to add a helper file. We don't have a background file there. So it's not going to allow anybody to sign up, but that's okay.
Right. And then the application logo, you could use your own for the application page, but I can show you how they have now what they call universal login. So then if you have multiple applications that kind of share the same like logo and theme and things like that, coloring, then you can just configure it in one place and everybody's going to have the same login page. And the other thing that you need to configure here that's essential is the allowed callback URL. That's where Auth0 is going to come back once our backend is talking with Auth0. This is the address Auth0 is going to come back with the temporary token that's necessary. So here, what's the address again? It's
it was
auth demo.
Auth demo, OAuth demo .fm BetterForms.
And then the path will be auth. So all this is on our docs. It's live on our docs. I can quickly show here, I guess. So if you go to our docs under user OAuth, it's all there. So then explaining how the callback is there. And the next steps where Charles will show a little bit. So this should be all. And then, yeah, you can tune in as much as you want here, according to your preferences. And then the example I want to show here is the page that once you go out from BetterForms to Auth0, this is the login page that's gonna land. So you can customize here as you want, as you need. So this is the example we would have. And this would work for all your apps with this new universal login they have. And then, yeah, your company logo, colors, and everything. So that's where Charles should land once he clicks on that login with Auth0.
All right, so I can probably add those credentials in now.
Mm-hmm. Gonna go.
Oops. Okay, so Eduardo's sent me these credentials here, and we're going to delete this probably later on, but you can. So we go into app settings and under authentication, enable third-party authentication. And then let's grab these. So select a provider is going to be Auth0. And Zoom is always in the way. So is this my subdomain, this one here?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. They have a new how do they do that as a top? Oh, I see. That's the Auth0. It's not an actual domain. This is really the prefix, the part that goes in front of the main Auth0 stuff. Got it. All right. And let's copy this. We'll paste this in here. And oh, did I get it all? Copy.
You got the number.
Yeah, I got the number in there too. So let's do this again. Believe it or not, number one thing we see for support is people not copying and pasting passwords and things like that. And client secret goes in there. Okay, and save. We did notice a bug. I'm not sure if it's fixed yet, but it'll be fixed by next week or so. And we noticed it when you hit save under this app settings, it wasn't clearing cache within BetterForms network. So I'm just going to go into one of the pages here, and I'm just going to make a quick save. That'll force the cache to clear. Okay, so I think we've got everything configured.
Oh, did you mention about the callback landing page? extra page that needs
Oh,
to
no, I
create?
have not. Okay, so we've added the button on the page. That's the login button. So let's talk about the workflow and how actually OAuth works a little bit more, because I think it'll be helpful just to understand. And this would touch base with Dean if you're going to be building any kind of other type of OAuth workflows as well. It's kind of a confusing thing, and it's not, I'm going to be honest with you, it's probably not super pleasant if you have to code it yourself. It's pretty easy to use in BetterForms because we've done it, or I wouldn't say we, Eduardo's done all the hard work. Basically, if you think of it, the three parties that are at play here, we have the browser, BetterForm Cloud, and the auth provider. So we start off where the user is clicking the button, and that button is taking us through a path action to BetterForms Cloud. BetterForms Cloud is basically fetching your private credentials, and it's calling Google and saying, hey, Google, this particular app wants to have a client that logs in. Google says, yeah, here is a temporary token that's going to last for so long. And that way you can safely go to us and we'll allow them to log in. So that redirects the browser way over here. And the browser redirects to Google's page. So that's that second segment. If we're not using Google and using something like OAuth, it goes to OAuth first, or sorry, Auth0, my mistake, first, and then it goes later on to Google if needed, if you're not logged in. All right, so it does it an extra 2 steps, but it redirects. And the important part about here, and this is what makes OAuth secure, is that when you're entering credentials on this second level, it's not going through your BetterForms app or whatever app that's built. It's actually going through the provider's code, right? So it keeps the code secret, or sorry, safe. And then from there, you hit Authenticate. And at this point in time, let me see, once the user authenticates, that authenticates with Google Cloud here. Google Cloud says, yes, this person is valid. And when they say, yes, this person is valid, BetterForms exchanges that for a regular JWT that we use internally for authentication. So it's exactly the same as your regular authentication. And then the user comes back from there, and then they land at a page. Now, because they've authenticated through Google, we still have to do some of the initial stuff that you want to run to have sort of feature parity. And that's one of the things is to make sure that you run an on login hook, because you might be setting up some variables or some environmental things like that. So we have a new action called auth login OAuth. And as you return from Google, we jump to this page, which would run this action. I'll show you what that looks like. It's pretty simple. And then that would carry on to your regular BetterForms workflows. So we need to add that page into our app. I don't know if I've done that yet. I don't think so. Yes, we have. Okay. So we have some examples for these things here. So you don't have to code your own. You don't have to watch the video again. And let me just jump to our examples page here. Under these examples are live. If you just search for OAuth, you'll find 2 of them. The first one Hassan made here, and it's OAuth buttons, and we'll just have a quick look at that. All right, so here's an example of a few different buttons, and the buttons are already configured with some actions, so you can literally copy and paste them, but look under the hood on how they work. You will not be able to log in. This is an example page of buttons, so you can't log in from this page because there's no app behind this that allows you to do that. But you can use this as an example template, so it's pretty easy there just to add the button and the action. Right. And the second example is our redirect page. And that's that page that we're going to land on after you log in. On my app over here, let me just go back. You'll see it for a quick second. It's going to show up right here. So we log into Google. That takes us to this page. I sign up, or I log in, and then there, this is a temporary landing page, and then it takes you, and you see this in all kinds of apps. It's not just that BetterForms thing. It's a temporary page where you come back from the authentication, and then you complete the login workflow. So to do that, to grab that page, you can simply copy this page into your app. You open the page, you would select duplicate, and that would duplicate the page right into your active application that you're working on. The page is pretty simple. It really just has a It has, and I do recommend duplicating this page as a starter template. It has a few things in here already. It has some Friday Live header name or whatever you want to change. And it also shows if there was an authentication error or problem with configuration, it'll show that as well, right? I'm not in this, so it's not going to preview right now for me. And that's about it. You can just duplicate that page into your app, and that's what I've done. That's what I've done here. And I think that is it. The page doesn't really have a lot on it. I think I mentioned this already. There's one action called on-form load, and inside the on-form load, it runs this new action called auth login OAuth, and that completes the login. Okay. On before registration as well, you'll know in the on before registration hook, you'll know about what information is available. You'll know like their email, for example, and then you can either allow them to that. So in other words, you don't want to allow, if you have a scenario where you don't want to let a random person sign up, there's a new hook. Let me see if I can pull that up. There is a new hook called on before registration. And let me just see if I can find that. Just a second here. There it is here. Okay, let me share the screen here. Okay, so there's some slight changes to the hook. This is a new hook here called on before registration. And it's pretty simple. Basically, if you return true or false in this create user key, it'll determine whether that person's allowed to sign up or not. So at this point here in your code, you would fetch the email and you would check email for existing. And then, maybe do something else that you need to do, whatever. They're not existing, create something. If they are existing, you don't have to match them up at this point yet because they haven't actually signed up, or they're about to sign up, right? They're about to register. And then you optionally return true or false in there, whether, some kind of if can sign up.
So once they match the records that we have in the database, we don't have to send them an email to say, click here to verify and all that.
No reason for it. Perfect. Yeah. Right. Because you know that email exists because they use that third-party provider.
Got it.
So it'd be something along that line. And this would be like a false kind of thing. Or vice versa, I guess. I got these backwards, I think. There. So if they can verify, if they can sign up, then they would sign up. And if not, they wouldn't. And that I would look them up with some kind of mechanism, just like, something like get column, and if is empty, the result of the get column, then if they're able to sign up or not. Okie doke. If there's no other questions, we'll put that to rest. All right. I want to just run you through a little bit. We don't really have too much time, but I'd like to introduce you to some new concepts that we're playing around with. And it's going to be a presentation that we're giving in .fmp Berlin. That's coming up next week. Next week it starts next Thursday. I'm not sure if there's anybody from our Friday Live that's going to that. And basically what I'm going to do is show navigator. How do I switch this around? Next slide. All right. I don't know if this is going to work properly here. I just rebuilt my machine. And this is mind all this other stuff on the screen. I'm going to blast through some of this stuff because here, but basically we're going to be talking about concepts of synchronization, and this is something we've been spending a lot of time on. over the past little while. And synchronization really happens at a whole bunch of different levels. It's not just like what we consider sync. You know, I want to have this server in sync with that server, but we use it in BetterForms all the time internally under the hood. It's like keeping any kind of data accurate with some other source of data. Maybe it's the main source of data, the source of truth, or maybe it's just a peer. So we're finding that we're building a lot more apps where we're starting to incorporate these concepts and starting to have to think about keeping data in synchronization more. So this is really going to be more just an introduction to this talk that I'm going to be giving next week. It's mostly on the theory of sync. So it might make you really yawn a lot, and I won't feel offended for that. But you might find it really interesting as well. And hopefully you can get something out of it in terms of concepts or something, because I guarantee you're going to have to use synchronization in some kind of fashion. You're probably doing it already. Whether you're just literally committing a record in FileMaker, you're kind of synchronizing this UI with the database, or whether we have to pull that data out into a webhook or into an application like BetterForms or something like that. The stuff I want to talk about, it's not really like a one size fits all. It's really just some concepts. I'm going to dig into one particular concept in general. These slides are not by any means dialed in yet, so I apologize for that. So there we go. We're going to talk about whether you want to synchronize or not. And most of the time, you don't actually need to synchronize things. And I'm using the term synchronization when there's some kind of feedback between system A and system B that says, yes, I've done this, or, hey, do you have that, in some fashion. Most of the time you can get away with synchronization with simple importing, right? So that means you can jump in and you can pull data. And that, in fact, that's what, if you're built any kind of apps in BetterForms, it's effectively what you're doing. You're in a hook, you're fetching all the contacts of a certain group or a certain query, and you're importing those into the front end. You're just grabbing all of that stuff blindly and saying, hey, front end, here it is. Here's the 50 contacts. And most of the time you can do that because the amount of data is relatively small. Synchronization really comes in when you can't do that practically. And there's usually a couple main reasons why you can't. There's a couple restrictions. One of them is a time restriction. So you need to have something function in real time. I'm just going to mute myself here for a second, excuse me. Or you don't have a continuous connection. So there's no persistency between the front end and the back end, or system A and system B. And that's when you have something that goes offline or online. The time factor one is when you have either a huge amount of data, maybe I got gigabytes of data and I need to keep those in sync, or and it just physically would take long, it would take maybe a day or something like that to download all of this data. Or the other scenario is when I need the data in really, really real time. So that means we're both working on an application of some sort, and we need that data happen at real time. So some examples of this kind of stuff is typically, if you have just let's just talk about really simple, and this is the one I want to get into, is 2 FileMaker servers. And you want these 2 FileMaker servers to talk to each other and to remain, maybe one's a backup server and for redundancy, and the other one's your main server that's online. And you want to be able to pull one of those servers offline, maybe do some updates or something like that, have them resynchronize, and then do the same thing with the other one. So that would be an example of a server to server. Technically it's a peer, right? But the server to server. We also have synchronization that happens between classes of things. So that means between, say, server and client. And there is a big difference between the client. The client would be something like, let's say, BetterForms or a web app or mobile app or something along those lines. The difference there between server to server and server to client is a client, if the client drops off permanently, it's not a big deal. Server to server, if one drops off permanently, it could potentially be a big deal. And then there's also between peer clients that are technically offline. And what I mean by that is if my son and I, we ride dirt bikes a lot lately, and if quite often he he's got a GPS and he's got his phone and he goes riding one way, I go riding the other way, or he's faster than I am and I lose him and I need to maybe log some data. And when I get close enough to him, I want to have that data synchronize up automatically in some fashion. So those are sort of some scenarios of sync that you can do. There's really other places that it happens as well. Inside applications or inside, we don't have this so much in FileMaker because FileMaker takes care of it, but inside web apps, we have this thing called a reactivity engine. And that reactivity usually comes from something like Vue.js. That's what's used in BetterForms, but it also comes from things like React and Angular and Svelte and these other reactive frameworks. And basically what they do, these reactive frameworks, is they take some piece of data, user makes some kind of change in the data, and they have some kind of internal database. Are these drawings showing up on the screen, by the way? Yeah, okay. All right. And that kind of goes into, this is all local to the device. Okay, this is very crude. I didn't have time to build it to scale here. And they make some kind of a change, that goes from a small case C to a capital C, and then the system basically pushes out every place that C is located, or that word is that first name or whatever, and then they all get updated. In a way, this is a synchronization. This one's actually called, it has a special name called a flux pattern.
Wouldn't that also be called journaling?
Pardon me?
Wouldn't that also be called journaling?
It could be called that. That's really getting into the mechanisms of things like whether it's an action oriented, is a pub sub. If I'm going to be just making or annotating the changes or the differences. In this particular case, this is really an import and this is really an export, right? As a whole system, it's a little different. Hope that answers that a little bit. All right, so basically on that, I want to sort of dig into this one where we have between systems, between two servers. And I want to talk about what the minimum requirements are to make something like that work. Because with our newest version of FileMaker, we got some kind of cool benefits that we can do. Whereas 3 months ago, we had to jump through some really big hoops. So some of the requirements, and these, you may or may not have these kinds of requirements, but one of the requirements that we had to look at is something where something can go online, offline. It can fail at any point in time. And it's really important that we had field level resolution, and there could be 2 to n devices. So we don't know how many of the devices are going to be sharing this data. You may have heard this quote before. There are 2 hard things in computer science: cache and validation, and naming things. And if you've ever pair coded with me, I get stuck on naming things massively. That's the hardest thing I've ever done. Cache and validation is really just synchronization, right? It's keeping data in sync. And I found this kind of a cute meme here. And it's Mo throwing what's his or Barney or whatever out of the tavern. And then he says, "Oh, great, you're done." And then he boom, he shows up again. And I can't think of how many times in systems, Christina's actually working on a problem very similar to this, where she goes and makes some piece of change in one memory variable, and then everything looks fine. And then suddenly it shows up and it's the wrong variable. And everybody has these kinds of things happening in systems. And it turns out with these synchronization systems, you usually can't get rid of that totally. This is what I'm sort of learning, and not through experience, but through research, is you can't always get rid of this guy showing up again. It may be just a manageable problem. And what I mean by that is when you're synchronizing stuff and you have 2 servers and one server drops off a line, or maybe 3 servers and one server drops off a line, another one comes back online. There's going to be a time when you sometimes are redundantly sending some additional data, or you're sending something. Maybe it's not data, but it's metadata, and you have to send that again. And the trick to a good sync system is to minimize that redundancy. In BetterForms, we do it, and it's not really a bad problem because it's pretty cheap. We basically fetch, let's say, all the contacts, I got 50 contacts, 100 contacts, and I dump them into the memory of the browser. And I make one change and we say, it's cheap enough, just send me all 50 again. And it just happens again in the next 200 milliseconds or so. So it's not too bad, but that system breaks when you start getting into, say, 300, 1,000, 1,000,000 contacts. It's not practical to have all of that data each time. So at that point, we have to kind of look through other mechanisms. And oops, I'm going to go back one here. Sorry, there we go. All right. So that's where we get into this mechanism called conflict-free data replication types, or replicated data types, or CRDTs. And this is kind of an area of I guess intercommunication computer science that's pretty heavily researched and continues to go on. And there's no, from what you can tell, I can tell there's no great way of solving this. And this is when I have a piece of data, and I tried to make up a little example here. Let me see if I can find it here. I have a piece of data, and then I have somebody else who has some data. So I used Giancarlo here, my friend in Italy, and I used Ian because he's going to be giving a speech next week. Does a lot of machine learning stuff. And I used myself, and I'm in Canada, and then we have Germany, and Germany doesn't have a thing because they have too much privacy going on. So we're not going to include that server just yet, and for a reason. But basically, I'm in Canada, he's in the UK, and Giancarlo's in Italy, and we all do want to decide what we're going to have maybe for some kind of a piece of data here. So I want to sort of jump into this concept of what we need to resolve things. We're going to try to decide what we're going to have to drink choice. And I'm going to pick, I'm more of a wine drinker, but I'm going to pick beer to represent Canada. Seems like beer represents every country, and I have some piece of data, and I say drink choice is going to be beer. And that's my choice. And I distribute this database to everybody. I send out the database, and Ian here, he gets this, and Giancarlo gets this as well. And everything is fine. And then they actually got a chance to look at the data, and Ian says, you know what, I'm not really into the beer thing. I'm going to have, or maybe I'm going to pick a different type, and I'm going to pick, actually he'll pick water. Right? He says, I want to drink water. And while he said that, these two systems at any given point of time, they're not in sync anymore because he's made this change, right? So we got to get this data to the other side. We could just import the data, and then we could import the data here, and that would sort of work. And for most use cases, that kind of works. And Giancarlo, he says, no wine, red wine. All right, to be exact. Okay, are you guys with me so far? Kind of makes sense so far. So here's the problem, is this communication here drops off for a split second. And this one here, let's say drops off because he drops off for whatever reason. And we all have these three different things. So the question is, how do we resolve this data? Right? And data has to be resolved based on one of two things, or really, it's really based on one thing. It's a set of rules, right? What are the set of rules that we're going to resolve it with? So most CRDTs resolve this by adding some metadata into the information. And that metadata is something that the rule set can use, or we're going to call the resolver, can use to equalize the data. So typically what simple synchronization systems do is they have somebody become some kind of a master node or a spoke node or whatever, and they say, hey, I'm going to be the source of truth. And this thing changed, so I see that it changed, and let's add a timestamp that it changed in here. So we add some kind of a timestamp. Let's see if I can get this in here. And we say timestamp. I'm going to just put timestamp of 1, right, for easy numbers. So that changed that timestamp 0. I created beer and I sent it out to them. Ian went and changed it to timestamp 1. We say timestamp 1 is greater than timestamp 0 over here. So therefore this data gets updated over here. And that kind of works, right? It kind of works because this one here is also connected. This one here is also connected here. And now we would effectively have this data here. This data gets replaced, and now the drink has become water. And Giancarlo's computer, he suddenly comes back online because he's doing an update, and he sees that he pulls into my Canada Hub machine and he gets his update. So he turns into water as well. So that kind of works. But the problem is what happens when we only want to change some pieces of data? So for example, I have the drink, but I also maybe have the food choice. And oops. Let's try this here. Food. And there we go. That's funny, huh? It doesn't want to. Oh, well, here, we'll put food up here. Oh, maybe not for some reason. How about here? Can I put food? There we go. All right, so we got food, and I am going to pick what's a stereotypical
Sausage.
Canadian food?
Oh,
Pardon me?
poutine.
Okay. There we go. No stereotypes. We do have it in every store, though, it seems like. Okay. So where we go. So I picked a type of food, and up here he's going to have some I'll go stereotype again, bangers and mash, whatever those are, right? And then back to the stereotypes again. Giancarlo is going to pick pasta. There we are. All right. So we've all changed some of this data. Now here's where the problem is we've changed this. He's changed that when he's been offline. Right. And I've changed. How are we doing for time? I'm going to finish up in a second. I've changed when and we were online, but really being online and offline from a synchronization aspect almost makes no difference. Right. Offline just means that the time difference between timestamp 1 and timestamp 2 is further, but it makes no difference in terms of data resolution. So here's where CRDTs come in. If I want to maintain the fact that one person changed the food at timestamp 1, and maybe at timestamp 2, maybe he's not going to change the food. He's going to leave it at poutine because he says, oh, this sounds interesting. I think I'll try this food. And but he did want to change the wine. So that means he's changed one field here. This hasn't changed over here, and this has changed here. So how do you resolve all of this stuff? The concept of a conflict-free replicatable data type is that the data changes. Right now, any given piece of data, these are records or fields. This is a record, and this is a field within the record, and they all have the same ID, so that's the same record. So the idea here is that my piece of data doesn't have enough information for me to resolve it, right? And I don't necessarily want Canada as being the main hub, because what happens if we get taken over for some reason and my data, my internet goes offline, right? So something's happened here, maybe a storm or something's happened, and I've gone offline. I still want these guys to be able to resolve their data as best they can. And when I come back online at that point, and only at that point, I would resolve my data in the future, right? Maybe I can connect to him, or I can connect to here. So now we've gotten rid of this concept of having a hub, and instead we have some kind of a node, not quite a mesh network, because that's more for communication, but it's kind of a fluid kind of mesh where these pieces of data can connect to each other. And this may be talking to here as well. But in order to resolve the data, we have to have the set of rules. So the set of rules we're going to apply, we're going to go by is first come, first serve, or whoever changed the data last. Sorry, last come, first serve, I guess it is, something like that. Whoever changed the data last is going to be the one that survives. Even if I'm offline, I want to have whoever changed the data last based on an agreed time. We'll use UTC time last. But we also want to have field level resolution. So what that effectively means, and I'm going to finish up with this, is we need to modify this data type, right? I told you this is getting theoretical, right? So stay with me for a bit, and it'll start to come together, hopefully. So that means our data type needs to have additional information. Instead of just having a timestamp field, which wasn't enough because that's for the whole record, and that's okay. I can still apply that last record to change wins. I actually changed the timestamp into into an object here. And let me see if I can find where is our thing to make this code? Of course, I can't find it on here. Oh, well. All right. So we'll pretend this is all code here. So my timestamp needs to now be an object. And what I really need to do is within the timestamp, I'm going to create some keys within this object. I want to create a key called food. And this food was modified at timestamp. It's poutine, so it's timestamp 0 because I originally created it. But Giancarlo here, he changed the drink and he changed that at timestamp 2. Let's just give that like 2 units later, whatever they are. So now I have enough information here. So I have a main data type, plus I have this augmented piece of metadata here that I can now synchronize all of this stuff here. Because when I look at this, and let's get rid of this guy here and put this in there for a second, and I want to synchronize these 2 pieces of data. So I'm going to move this data down to here for a second so we can see it beside each other. And he changed the food to bangers. Is that how you spell bangers? I don't know. And he changed this to water. Right. And we also need, oh, what happened to me? I must have erased it. Shoot. I must have erased my thing here. Sorry about that. Timestamp. And he changed his food at timestamp 1. And he changed his drink. Yeah, we'll go also timestamp 1. As soon as he saw it, he said, I'm getting rid of this. So we're changing everything here. All right, Giancarlo was connected later. And let me just steal this, put this in here. And he changed his food at timestamp 0, was what the original time that the food was changed. He never changed it. And the drink he changed at timestamp 2. Right. So this is now enough information that at the field level, I can resolve this. And the best thing about tracking the data in this fashion is that I can drop offline and come online as many times as I want. And the data will resolve based on that set of rules. So I look at each level. I look at the food and I say, okay, between food 0 and food 1 wins. So therefore, food becomes banger. Drink at drink timestamp 1 and drinks timestamp 2, timestamp 2 wins. So therefore, this turns into water, turns into wine. How about that? Right. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
All right. So since I can resolve this, even if Giancarlo was to send me his information later on, it doesn't matter because the resolution outcome will always be the same. So that means he could drop offline and suddenly he sends the information again and I resolve it again. My resolution between these 2 things will be exactly the same every time. And what that does is that allows you to resend information, have more robust communication. I'm kind of fast tracking this because we're out of time. Have more robust communication because I can resend stuff. I can queue stuff out. I have a journal of edits of these recommended changes, and I can import them to here and they'll resolve. I can import them to here and they'll resolve. So now these 2 people are at the same time, but maybe I was offline. When I go to resolve mine, when I come online again, we just look at these 2 numbers. Now, there can be a time when Giancarlo made another change, but this one here is getting resolved. So that means we're a little bit out of sync. But every time something changes, if I keep that in some type of a log, some kind of a running journal of edits, then as soon as I import that again, everything will equalize. And that's the concept of eventual consistency, to put it in a very short kind of presentation here. So basically, by adding this little bit of extra information onto our data, and this can sit in a certain field. So this is one field here, one record. These are 2 fields in a record. This is a single extra field of JSON object. Storing that extra little bit of information will allow us to basically have peer-to-peer eventual consistency in our apps. All right, I'm going to stop it here because that's only about a little bit in, but that kind of gives you a brief taste of some, I don't know if I call it data science things. But yeah, go ahead.
So how would you handle the synchronization or the, say you have invoice numbers that you're creating, it's a serial numbered thing. If you both are creating those in sequences, how would you prevent overlapping or reusing a number?
Yeah.
Connect to like an API and everybody has to do a call and have another source.
Yeah,
of
but
truth?
you can't rely on that though, because what if you're offline, right? Like there could be a scenario where you just physically, this connection is broken right in here. So how can Giancarlo create a new invoice and have it sequential? Well, you can't really have that sequential, but what you can do is you can create the invoice. And there's another concept of CRDTs where I didn't get into this here because it's a little bit more abstract. But let's say I have some kind of a thing called account. And let's say instead of drink, it's called account. All right. Now that count is like some kind of a running number, that kind of an idea. What happens is instead of tracking the count, you track things like kind of +1, -2, this is like an inventory, same idea, right? Count or inventory or something like that. Inventory is probably easier to. Sorry. So you have like +1, -2, +3, that kind of thing. And when you add up all of these across everybody else's suggestions, you'll all end up with the same number in time, right? You can't really assign a pure number. And what I mean by pure is not one that's prefaced by the word Italy, like Italy. He could easily put Italy _01 and just resolve that problem really simply. But if he just wants to have invoice 1, invoice 2, and this one invoice 3 and invoice 4, you can't resolve that number right away. Because unless you have banks of numbers, but to make them contiguous, you couldn't do that right away. What you could do is preface it, Italy 01, UK 01, Canada 01, 02, 03. So either namespace the number is one way, or the other way is you wait till everything resolves and then assign a number at a post resolution. And then you'd have maybe one server would pick the number. So once you have data equilibrium, once Italy says yes, up until a certain time, I've received this and I've received this and yep, I've received this, then you can assign the number. So you post doing that, if that makes sense.
Charles, I love your comment that every system is offline, be it a microsecond or millisecond versus, an hour. And I think that's a novel way of thinking. I just have a structural question here. You put the timestamps in this example in an object, in a JSON object. Is there a reason you have taken that approach as opposed to individual fields that's food time?
Yeah, we solve everything with fields in FileMaker, but not everybody does. That's one of the main reasons. There's no reason to have all these extra fields and things like that. So it's just metadata. So I basically create a JSON object which acts like its own little database, really. I mean, you could normalize this out into a whole bunch of tables and graphs, but it's not necessary. Well, by doing this way, I add literally one extra field, which is the timestamp information. This field never gets wider than the width of this field here, right? So it has a finite width. This can have really, really big text in it, but this is only going to have a timestamp. So it doesn't really add extra weight or bloat to the system. And it's a single field. So from an integration aspect, it's really simple.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Stephen had that question about the synchronizing invoice numbers, and unfortunately, it's an old accounting problem because accounting systems sort of require, from auditing perspectives, that things are in sequential order. I don't know if auditors, like government auditors, have changed their viewpoints on that, because trying to always have synchronized numbers, because that was how they could find out that you maybe accepted revenue but you didn't record it, and so then they said, oh well, you're missing 5 invoices here, let's just assume that they were worth $10,000 and you always tax on that $10,000. So I don't know if you can go with random numbers for invoices. I don't know if government auditors
if you
accept that
do,
anymore.
if you do have a mandate to have them continuous, you most likely can have them continuous with namespace, and that's the simple solution. Just add a namespace of your location. This is location Canada, UK, ID, and Italy, and just namespace and not the invoice with that in there. That's a simple solution. If you must make them sequential, you can make them sequential after the system reaches equilibrium. So, and then you say, well, how can I tell when these three are equal? Like right now I have poutine and beer, he's got red wine, he's got bangers and water, right? They're clearly not equal, right? But if I have a log or I have a dictionary of who's I should pay attention to, so I know that there's two other systems. I know there's a UK system and an Italy system that I have to pay attention to. When the UK talks to me, I can say, oh, the UK last talked to me as of timestamp 2. Oh, Italy talked to me as of timestamp 1, right? So up to timestamp 1, I know the data, that snapshot of data, the resolution up to that is perfectly correct amongst everybody. From that time forward, I don't. So what that means in terms of an audit, from an accounting aspect, is you can't maybe audit the stuff today, but you can audit the stuff from yesterday. Right? Or whenever your system was, you know, this might be on a ship, right? This could be offline and on a ship. And well, you obviously can't include them until they come back to port.
Right.
Can I make a question?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is clear for me because I already approached this problem. I like your way to make a timestamp, but what is the format that is using a timestamp? Because in Italy, we have, in US and Canada, we have the amount on the front and the day on the last. And also we are in Esther, in Costa, we have different, the timestamp should be in a worldwide format.
Yeah. There's only one true timestamp, and that's UTC. Prove me wrong.
Which one?
UTC. Just use UTC time.
Okay.
Right? Because you know, this is 6 hours apart. Yeah. So you go and make this change. I make this change here. You make this change 5 hours, 59 minutes later. You're supposed to win. Right? Now I'm using timestamp as the resolution metadata, but it may not be. Right? It may not be. Most of the time it's going to be sufficient. Right? But an example of that is we have 3 different soldiers in the army. Right? You have you have the major, the captain, and the infantry person. Right? Doesn't matter what they say, major always wins. Doesn't matter what they say, major always wins. Maybe it's some kind of rule like this, right? In which case, this timestamp wouldn't be a timestamp; it would be the rank. Let that sink in. That's a tricky one.
But FileMaker, can you force FileMaker to create a UTC timestamp format, or you need to build
you
that?
can just you just get UTC timestamp MSEX or whatever it's called, right? So the big long digit number changes every
because
millisecond.
they have client, they use with different system.
No, but you say UTC
countries.
is always the same. Doesn't matter if it's the browser.
Okay.
Like it makes no difference, right? It makes no difference if I have this laptop here and connected, it's still UTC time.
Okay.
It is possible to have some timestamp drift between the device and the server, right? But generally speaking now, virtually every computer system, like when's the last time you set the clock on a computer? Right? I haven't done that in probably 10 years. I haven't set a clock, maybe more. The last time was Windows when you had to pick the thing and you had to set the time. That's probably 20 years ago, right? Every system automatically syncs with the national time, NTC or whatever it is. And typically they're within seconds of each other.
Charles,
so you don't really have to worry. Yep.
Charles, epoch time, do you know what I refer to?
Yeah, time since, yep.
That's a number, right? That's an infinite updating number, which is for everybody in the world the same. We use it for syncing with medical systems all over the world. And it's one unique ever up running number, which gives you, especially make Germany your main times or main financial server or something, right? Something could, with an API call, you just, indeed, when you're on a ship and you come in and you can reach at least one server that gives out as a main server the unique invoice ID, you basically grab it from there, and epoch time stamp makes it unique.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have like, so the epoch time is a time since a certain event, right? It's a time since whatever that event is. FileMaker's got some time, what is it, 1970 or something like that. Unix has got a different,
1970, whatever.
but the point
yeah.
is, it doesn't make any difference what they are. It doesn't make a difference at all. What matters is that everybody's using the same one. And since you're the author of the system, you're going to assume that every one of them is having the same time from a certain event. And it's mostly important that it's what I mean by UTC really is that it comes from a certain time zone. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I guess if you're traveling at near the speed of light or something like that, you may have to have some time dilation. That's a relativity joke there. But, you know, is it get, what is it? UTC, is it C? There. There we go, right? So you can see every time I hit space, it reevaluates, boom, 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 boom. So that's the whole idea. And that time is pretty consistent between machines. So you can use that totally. If you have a problem where you're worrying about milliseconds, right, then you're going to have some kind of an adjustment. Each one is going to have a calibrator, and it's going to have to, you're going to be measuring ping times and calculating your things. There's algorithms for doing that. It's a whole other world, but that is possible, but I wouldn't worry about it. So at any rate, so you say, this is kind of this kind of stuff. If this is of interest to you, I'll gladly tell you a bit more about it, but otherwise we're going to probably finish up our call today. I think we need to do a quick draw as well.
Yeah, Charles, maybe later you and I can talk about that. I actually have a need for something like that.
Yeah, sure, certainly.
Okay.
All right, Andrew, do you have that stuff by any chance?
Yeah, I just sent you the wheel.
Okay, super. Let me.
Are we drawn for bangers or pasta?
Yeah, a wine, I hope. I just ordered some more wine. I get wine from a local wine shop here. And I got to go bottle it. I was supposed to bottle it yesterday, but I got so much stuff to do. It's going to be there next week. All right. Basically, the rules of our giveaway here, and Madeleine is a little bit behind on sending the stuff out, but we will get your stuff out if you've won in the past. But the rule is you have to be here to win. So that's the gist. And it'll be like a going once, twice, gone. So let's give it a try here. Hopefully this works.
Hey, Charles, I just noticed the new FileMaker logo is very similar to your logo.
Yeah, I think it looks kind of like Bart Simpson, actually. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
No, I don't see the resemblance.
No, kind of that no chin thing.
Maybe soon they buy you.
And Doug, is Doug in the call?
I do see him in the call.
No? Oh, that's a bummer.
Well, I do see Douglas in the call, but I don't know if he is present.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
all right.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Right, Madalena will be in contact with you for some information. That's the very first time we've ever won first, like on the first spin. Usually like 6 or 7. So
cool.
Okay, we're going to kick around, but I'm going to end our recording here. Thank you, everybody. And next month, if you have suggestions for our Friday Live, I don't want to say we're running out of stuff, but by all means, please do volunteer some suggestions. Thank you.